Okay, so we can start.
Yes.
Okay, so hi everyone and welcome to this mid-career session. I'm Stella Bichebe, a third-year PhD student at ENS Lyon in France, and I will moderate this session. I hope you are all well and that you have a lot of questions for our great panelists. Here we have Professor Jana Jiveka from the Technical University of Munich, Dr. Rayat Wabi, Assistant Professor at Carnegie Mellon University of Pennsylvania, Dr. Rajita Mittal, Assistant Professor in the Computer Science Department at the University of Illinois, and Dr. Irene Zhang, researcher in the Systems Research Group at Microsoft Research Redmond. So I will let you give a small introduction of each of you. We can start with Professor Jana.
Okay, thanks for the brief introduction. Hi, everyone. I'm really happy to be here. I'm based in Munich, at TU Munich. I'm also an assistant professor for database systems. So I'm covering that part of systems. I am in my second year of tenure track, and I don't know if I should say something a bit more personal. I have a small daughter and I'm pregnant with the second one, so I can probably address any questions that may arise for how I balance tenure track, being a professor and a mother, so in the middle of the Corona crisis. So yes, this is a bit about myself. Previously, I was a PhD student at ETH Zurich, and I was a lecturer for 1.5 years at Imperial College in London. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Rayat Wabi.
Hi everyone, I'm Riyad. As Stella said, I'm affiliated with CMU. I'm actually in year -1 of my assistant professorship right now. So so I'm definitely not mid-career as the title of the panel says, but that's okay. I work in sort of secure systems, applied crypto, this sort of thing, but you know, all systems is obviously awesome. So yeah, as far as sort of kinds of maybe questions that are super relevant to parts of the audience, I was on the job market last year in sort of weird COVID times, so I have insight that will be useful for like approximately the next 9 months, and then we all hope will never be useful again, but I'm happy to answer questions in the meantime about that sort of thing.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Irene.
Hi, I am a researcher at Microsoft Research. I think maybe, am I the oldest in this panel? I think I've been out of grad school for 4 years, and I work on data center operating systems, distributed systems. I don't know, questions that I can answer. I'm happy to answer questions about, academic research in an industry lab, working with collaborators across lots of universities. Yeah, stuff like that.
Okay, thank you. And Dr. Rajita.
Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Radhika Mittal. I'm an assistant professor in the EC and the CS department at UIUC. So I'm in the 3rd year of my tenure track. So I mostly work on network systems. And with regard to like some of the specific things I could answer, so I also have a small daughter. She's 5 months old now. So maybe I can actually might have some questions for Yana on how to balance things during COVID times. I'm just learning how to do that. And also I was on the academic job market before COVID, but my husband was also in the job market with me. So we were in the two-body situation, and he's also now a faculty at UIUC. So yeah, these are some of the other things. Okay.
Okay, thanks to all for this brief introduction. So I have a question in the Slack channel from Amy. What are possible career paths that you have considered, and how did you end up in your current path? So any of you can want to start?
I mean, I can start. I was applying for both academic positions after my PhD and for industry research. So I was considering both. They were both appealing to me. Eventually, I decided to stay in academia because I wanted a closer interaction with students. So I didn't want that bond to be decoupled as easily. Obviously, there is still an option that you are, for example, in something like MSR and still be an adjunct professor. So you can still teach, but I wanted to, yes, first give it a shot at academia. The reasons why I would have maybe preferred industry was that you actually tend to work in bigger teams as opposed to being a professor and then working with students. And the moment they're really, well packaged, then they graduate. So yes, this would have been different probably in industry. But yes, I think this sort of interaction, it gives us great pleasure to see how students evolve from bachelor's, master's, PhD. And yes, it's very satisfactory for me.
Okay, thanks for your answer. Yes, I want personally to ask the question to Dr. Ewan. What decided you to choose the industry instead of continuing in academic?
Yeah, so I think even when I interviewed, I was like, not sure that I wanted to be a faculty member. I don't really like teaching classes. It's not something that I really like mentoring students one-on-one, but I'm not really into teaching classes, especially large ones. And I, realized that I probably also wouldn't really enjoy writing grants, and like the service is also kind of meh. And so at some point I decided, like, well, if that's going to be, 50% of my job, that seems like a lot of stuff that I don't really want to do. I think one of the things, there were a lot of factors that went into my decision, but I think one of the things that appealed to me about MSR was the flexibility of career paths, that there are lots and lots of sort of outcomes for MSR researchers. Some of them go off into the product groups, some of them stay in MSR and just keep doing research, some of them go off to be faculty. They decide, at some point that's what they want to do. And so I kind of liked being able to define my own percentages of how much I was going to spend working with product groups and how much I was going to spend working with students. I think even now I'm sort of redefining it. I'd like to be writing more code, for example. And so that's like my goal for the next year, that I'm going to try to shift more of my management responsibilities onto other people so that I can spend more time being like an individual contributor, which is something that I also enjoy. So yeah, I think really it was the flexibility, a lot of it, that appealed to me.
Okay, thank you. So any other answer?
Yeah, so for me, like, I didn't hate teaching as much as Irene. I actually enjoyed teaching quite a bit. So like, and sort of mentoring students as well, like having that close relationship with students. I think that was also important for me. So that's one of the reasons why I chose academia over industry. I also felt that like being in academia might give me like slightly more flexibility in terms of career paths. I should try it out. If it doesn't work out, if I really realize that, actually just had this like this model of like, liking how to teach, but actually hate it or things like that. It might be easier to go back to industry from academia rather than the other way around. I mean, there are lots of very successful examples of, people who have been in industry and now they are faculty somewhere, and that's great. But like, I just felt that it might be easier to do the other way around. Like, I should try academia first, and then if things don't work out, if I don't like it as much, I might go back to industry later. But I'm liking it so far.
So why do you think the other sense is difficult going from industry to academic?
I just felt that way. I may be wrong. Like Irene might not agree with that entirely. And there are lots of successful examples as well. Like, people who went from industry back to academia. But like, I was in this academic mode. I was like a PhD student, and like just I was in that zone, and it just seemed like it's easier to
Okay.
just continue being in academia, and then yeah, if
Okay, I
things
see.
work out, I could go back to industry.
Okay, thank you.
I have a slightly different path through, the whole academic thing than most people. I actually spent about 10 years before starting a PhD as a circuit designer. And so I was like in industry, totally different industry, but industry. And so I can just paint the whole thing with one brush, which is great. And it was fine. It was fun. It was, interesting. And I got to work on cool stuff, but, it felt as if, well, look, we're trying something totally new. May as well go for sort of maximum difference from prior experience. So that was, I'd say, the zeroth order decision-making criterion was, I think probably wrongly, but I think that I know what being in industry it would be like as a researcher. Maybe this would be a new experience.
Okay, okay, thank you. Thank you for all your answers. So I have another question from Michaela Murray. No, from Lim Yu. Follow up the previous question. What are the things that might be beneficial to try out during PhD career to help you make the decisions for post-PhD career?
Maybe I can go first on that one. So I think internships are certainly good. So I interned at
Internship.
Google during my PhD, and that's when I realized that the kind of research that happens, at least at Google, is somewhat different from the kind of research I was doing during my PhD. Like at Google, at the very least, they were doing very interesting work, but it was more focused on like the near-term problems that the company is facing. Like, what can they sort of finding solutions that can like help the company near
okay.
term, whereas in academia, like I could sort of think like further out and like do like all sorts of crazy things that may not immediately benefit any company but could still be like intellectually interesting. So that was another
Yes.
difference that I felt between industry and academia, which also pushed me to join academia. But yeah, internships can help you figure that out. But being in industry also kind of allows you to make like more near-term direct impact, which is something that I also experienced at Google. And if that's the kind of thing that you care about, like doing internship will help you realize that, I feel really excited by the near-term impact I'm making, and like, affecting like so many products, like affecting like real products, real people, and yeah, so that's something that that could be very helpful.
Okay, thank you.
I think I'd also suggest like sort of helping out your advisor or apprenticing with grants and the other things that your advisor does. This will not only make your advisor love you, but it'll also give you an idea of what being faculty is like. And so, it's a little bit easier to make a decision when you've, both done the industry internship as well as the, the stuff around being a faculty member. I think being a faculty member is very different from being a PhD student. If you enjoy being a PhD student, honestly, like you could probably be a PhD student forever at MSR. But I think it just, I think it depends on which parts of the job that you like and how you want your day to look, like your day-to-day, the day-to-day things that you do. Like, do you want to spend it talking to students? Do you want to spend it teaching? Do you want to spend it coding? Yeah, those kinds of things.
Being a teaching assistant also helps, like in order for you to understand whether you would like teaching or not. That's another thing.
One other thing along these same lines, and this doesn't apply everywhere, but many schools, to my knowledge, ask students to join the admissions committee for PhD students. There is a lot to learn about, obviously about how admissions gets done and how letters get written and all of this sort of thing, which is also extremely useful no matter where you end up, because presumably if you're in academic research, you're going to have, if you're in industry research, you're going to have interns and you're going to write them letters too. So like this is a learning experience. But beyond that, you see, the sausage getting made, and it is a, very different thing to see, or at least it was for me. So I think this gives useful perspective.
I think on that note, being on shadow PCs, same thing. Like for the first couple of years, I spent a shocking amount of my time reviewing papers. So that's also something that I think I didn't explicitly learn during grad school, how to write reviews, but also I didn't expect to spend so much of my time doing that.
Okay.
Yes, I'm gonna second all of that, right? So I did. I mean, doing a PhD in Europe is a bit different because we were all expected to contribute for teaching. So I was already experienced with helping out for teaching and supervising students and all of that. But I also did two internships. So one was at Microsoft Research. And one was at Oracle Labs. So I got also a bit of a share or an experience of what it's like to do at least research in two different types of industry environments, because I knew that I wouldn't necessarily enjoy going into product development. And these were and then I also participated in my last year, I think, of PhD for a shadow PC at Eurosys. So as all suggestions indicated here, I tried to make a very informed decisions before I made the decision. But yes, so the only thing I didn't do is grant writing. But if any of the PhD student tries to, for example, apply for a fellowship like Google PhD fellowship, Microsoft PhD fellowship, all of that. So this is your first kind of preparation step towards, let's say, long-term planning of what it's like to line out what your let's say research path would be like in the next couple of years, right? So that would be the best initial step that you can try out, even if you don't necessarily participate in the grant writing for your own professor. So this would be an additional thing that you should always try to go for some of these fellowships, and writing it up for your own project is already a good preparatory step. Sorry. Yes.
Okay.
Maybe
Okay.
one tiny final suggestion here. And maybe this follows obviously from everything that's been said already, so I apologize if that's true. But even if you don't join a full shadow PC, like ask your advisor if there are any papers they want an outsource a review on. They will thank you for this. If ever somebody tries to outsource a review to you, say yes. Like, yes, it's work, but this is helpful. You interact with the rest of the PC. And actually, I would specifically suggest if somebody is outsourcing a review to you, ask them to add you to the conversation. Like so like if the conference software is Hotcrap, for example, like ask them to officially invite you through Hotcrap so that you can communicate with the other people on the PC, because there's a ton of education that comes from reading other people's reviews and thinking about reflecting on how they thought about a paper.
Of course. Yes, that's true. Okay, thank you. So we have a question from Michaela Murray. How have you dealt with project failures, especially for projects that looked like they had strong motivation at the beginning, but over time did not pan out?
I can go ahead and answer. First of all, I'm not sure that I necessarily have really had project failures. I would say that oftentimes it's possible to pivot the project or frame it in a different way. I wouldn't necessarily look at research projects as being like failures or not failures, because your goal at the end of the day is to do some like exploration, right? And you might end up with a negative result, which is to say like your hypothesis was not true, but maybe that's interesting. And, people don't really write as many negative result papers as they should, but oftentimes, those papers can teach us a lot. And so I wouldn't say necessarily that there is, a way to really say that like, oh, this research project has failed. And I don't know if there's something more specific that to add.
I had one case where I think I can just say without any equivocation that there was just a failure. Like I did a bunch of work and then it turned out this was not a publishable result, which was totally disappointing in the moment. But even in a few months afterwards, like maybe it wasn't so bad. And I think maybe the reason for that is that I learned so much doing all of the work that even though I didn't like publish a result at the end, it made publishing the next thing easier and the next thing after that. So maybe one way, and look, maybe this could sound like an empty platitude and I hope it doesn't, but it could be that like the right way to avoid this is to set up the project so that like even failure like has a reasonable outcome, right? So like clearly, like, I have to transcribe 6 months worth of data and then maybe something comes out of it. Okay, the downside there is you waste 6 months and you're not going to get anything from, except maybe faster typing speed. But like, if you're really like forcing yourself to do something that's super hard, even if the result is like not so good, then now you're good at something that's super hard, which is great. So, you know, maybe that's a way to salvage sometime.
I'd also say that I think advisors get better and better at sussing this out before you start. Because a lot of, and there's been a lot of stuff written about this, but a lot of publishing things is like, you know, the taste of the community at any given point in time, you know, what the reviewers are looking for and writing the paper in a particular way. And I think for advisors, because they keep doing this over and over and they often have many projects, right? It just becomes sort of like easier. And so, yeah, trust your advisor too, I think would be.
Yeah, basically, I think my experience has been similar to Irene, that like there's no real failure per se, but just that like you end up like sort of pivoting the project slightly, like you submit it once, you get some feedback, you realize that, hey, you know, okay, this part is like maybe like almost done, maybe this is the part I should focus on, and then you like refocus the project and you kind of resubmit again. And there's this, sometimes it takes like multiple tries to get the paper finally in. You may also like, you know, kind of calibrate on what venue you should submit the paper to and so on, but eventually things do work out for a project and you learn a lot in the process, and there's something you can still salvage. Like if you put in enough effort, you will get something interesting out of it at the end, which you could eventually publish. It may take some time, but good things should eventually happen.
So I will I definitely agree. What I would like to define the question a bit more specifically, right? So there are, what is a failure for someone, right? What is a failed project? So someone may consider a failure if my, you know, first and second submissions of a paper are not are not accepted and so on. And they're definitely, you know, adding a bit more work, pitching it in a slightly different way and so on. This is where your advisor will certainly help you, or your collaborators. Then there is an option of, you know, working on a project where the results are just not working out and there's, you know, very marginal improvement and it's just not publishable. In which case you try to, as we said, try to redirect it in a direction so that you still have some learning experience from that project, right? That you could use up for your next project. And then there is another type of failure, which I experienced slightly in my first 2 years of PhD, which was, there was a very exciting project in collaboration with industry where I was working on something, let's say, more revolutionary, because it was hardware, software co-design, you know, designing a new chip for databases. And, you know, there is not much at that time, you know, when I was, you know, first year PhD student, it was not something that everyone could give it a shot at. And then the project goal was that, okay, we don't publish it now because, you know, this needs to go into production, chip design and so on. But eventually, you know, towards the fourth, fifth year of the PhD, we will get the papers out. So 1.5 years into the PhD, the industry partner decides to pull back and says, no, we're, so initially it was the results are too good, we're not going to publish any of this, so you can't publish your work, right? And so in some sense, you could feel it as a failure because I've done all this work and now I can't talk to anyone about it, right? So what did I waste, quote unquote, my 1.5 years of the PhD? But in the end, I learned so much from it. It has nothing to do with what my PhD thesis ended up being. But that experience of these 1.5 years opened up this spectrum of, you know, being bold and being, you know, visionary about what you can actually do, that made me almost fearless about what we can try next, right? So yes, I can't publish any of that work, but it has definitely influenced the way I approach problems, which problems I would tackle, and so on. So even that is not a failure at the end of the day, even though at the moment it seems like the whole world has collapsed. That's how I need to find a totally different PhD topic. So yes, none of the things that immediately seem as, it's not going well, eventually, you learn to appreciate the value of the work that entered into that project.
Yes. Okay, then you you already answered the question that I wanted to ask to follow up the previous one. Do you have any anecdotes in your research path on a situation that happened and gave you a great lesson?
Could you repeat that?
Do you have any anecdotes in your research path on a situation that happened and gave you a great lesson? Hello? Maybe I will write it in the
Everyone's
chat.
thinking.
Yes, let me just write it in the chat. Yes. Have you seen it?
I think we're just all thinking.
Yeah, I heard the question. I was just thinking if I
Yeah,
have
it's a very
any
deep
anecdote.
question.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. Lessons.
So while thinking, maybe I will ask another question in the Slack channel. We can come back to this one at the end. So you have a question from Leizo. How difficult is it to switch one from academia to industry and second from industry to academia, if at all doable? I think we have give a path of answer at the introduction.
I mean, I'm happy to discuss that. I think it really depends on what you mean by industry. If you're talking about Google or Facebook or something, or Amazon, that is probably pretty hard. I think for MSR, historically it hasn't been, because I think at MSR there's, you're doing more sort of traditional research, you're publishing papers, and you get the chance to sort of build your personal brand versus being part of like a large group in a project that you can't talk about until it's done. And so then it becomes sort of difficult to, tell anyone about what you might be doing, and they won't be able to evaluate you, right? And so I think that's probably the biggest struggle. I wouldn't say it's not doable. I think it's just hard from regular industry. I think the people who have come out of MSR seem to have transitioned to academia pretty smoothly, as far as I know.
So maybe I can answer it from the other way around. Obviously, I haven't made a transition from industry to academia, but I've been on the hiring committees in academia. And so one of the concerns when we receive applications from industry is obviously one is what have they done? And so people that can publish, like Microsoft Research, can speak more freely about their work, while people that have worked for Apple or Amazon, then they have a slightly different problem. But another thing is obviously it's not just publishing. And this is the thing once you're in academia, as Irene pointed out, right? You need to start thinking about teaching, and you need to start thinking about gathering money. And so when you're evaluating whether to accept someone on a more senior level, you're always measuring these things. What is the success that this person has had for supervising students, and or managing bigger projects, or managing a lot of money, and this is again a big shock for them, because if you come from industry, you're not that accustomed to having to write these grants. And then maybe grant after grant gets rejected, and you have difficulty with planning on how to allocate resources for your projects and your group and your students. So the more senior you become from industry, the more these things will start to play a value for the hiring committee when they decide whether to take you on board as a professor. Right. Obviously, if you've been involved with some sort of teaching, as I said, visiting lectures, co-advising PhD students, having successful internship, this is all adding up. But as I said, the more senior you are, the more of these filters start to apply to you. And I'm sure that it's the other way around as well, right? For us, from academia moving to industry, even in academia, I don't have that much chance to, let's say, do coding because your time is otherwise occupied through surveys and supervision and reviewing and so on. Then you get a bit rusty. Now, of course, you need to do better time management and allocate time also for coding in addition to writing. But the more time you spend in academia, obviously, the more difficult may be to switch to industry, right? And I'm sure that maybe Irene is also interviewing faculty candidates that want to switch, and then they have different type of evaluation criteria.
Yeah, I guess one thing I'll say, I mean, it's a little bit hard to talk in the abstract. One thing I'll say is that I think maybe in some ways being an MSR researcher is more like being an academic than I would have expected, because we also spend time writing small grant proposals for, like I recently wrote one for the Teams folks for some money that we needed to get them to give us money to fund a project that we wanted to do. I think that may be why a lot of people seem to seamlessly kind of transfer between both, because, in our group, we have Rodrigo Fonseca, who just came from Brown. And then my manager, Ricardo, also used to be faculty at Rutgers. And then my manager's manager, Johannes, used to be at Cornell, and Peter Lee used to be at CMU. So it's like, clearly they are all very successful at being at MSR, and they used to be faculty. And so there must be some sort of skill transfer there. And then on the other side, right, like James Mickens, Monia went to MIT, James Mickens is at Harvard, Brian Parnot, I'm trying to think. Yeah, there's definitely been people who have gone the other direction too, and it would be, I don't know what their experience is the other way.
I think I can add maybe only a tiny bit, because obviously, Irene, you know way more than I do, but just thinking mechanically about what goes on, like at the interface, like when I'm applying for a job, or say applying to a PhD program, which that was my experience from industry to academia, was at the PhD application level. In all of these cases, like the application process is, well, at least for me, it was surprising how much it's driven by letters, which means there is certainly like who's writing your letter for you, right? Or your multiple letters for you. So if you're coming from a place that's doing industry research, but not in the sort of public facing way, like if you're working for some, stealth team at Apple doing something amazing, unfortunately, you're not allowed to talk about it. Nobody knows who you're working for. The letter can't say anything specific. Like this sort of thing, is a real weakness in the application process that I think, frankly, I think we miss fantastic people who could come back from industry into academia, but it's just like the process isn't set up to catch them. So this is one sense in which it's hard unnecessarily, but unfortunately that's how it is. It just there's sort of an assumed path. The further you stray from the assumed path, the worse the process is at recognizing you. So this just inherently makes these kind of weird track jumps a little bit difficult. I got lucky because I was sort of socially friends with somebody who sort of said, hey, you should think about doing some research. And then like I started doing research with him. And this was Mike Wolfish when I was in Austin. He was at UT Austin. We started working together. And then that's kind of what got me into academia. So it was like an unusual path, I guess, maybe isomorphic to undergrad, like in a class with somebody and then, starting to work for them, right? But until you get onto that path, things are a little bit more difficult. Like there's not an easy answer to how do I get a letter written or this sort of thing.
I guess one way to look at it too is that I would say that the academic interview process is necessarily much more conservative because they're hiring you for life. They don't know exactly, they're comparing you against a lot of other candidates. They don't know exactly what they're getting, right? But it's like a pretty big commitment. I think, I've seen the academic hiring process from listening to my advisor complain about it and sitting at MSR. And things are a little bit easier for us only because we often have at least one slot every year, and we only have to make a decision between systems students, right? Like we're only hiring in systems, and we don't have to negotiate with the theory group about whether, we're going to be able to hire the superstar in systems or they're going to hire the superstar in theory, right? Like we get to be completely selfish in that, like, okay, we'll just take whoever we think is the best fit this year for us. And so that's, I think that's maybe one of the things that makes it a little bit easier for us. Yeah.
So I would like to add just like one other small thing. It's actually, it may not matter for like many of you, but like one of the industry researchers I know, like he was telling me that he has like he has been asked to interview at like academic places, but one of the reasons why he's hesitant is like it would be a huge pay cut. Like he's making a lot more money being an industry research, and like being a professor doesn't pay you as much. So you may get used to like a certain lifestyle being an industry research, which you may not be able to keep up with being in academia. So that's another factor that might matter to some people.
Okay, thank you for those large answer and explanation. Thank you. So we have another question from Sachin Ashok. So if I'm misspelling, how do you make sure you are doing relevant systems or networking research in academia while being away from industry where the problems probably originate?
No, but I mean, so first of all, collaboration, right, is like a super easy one. I think I collaborate with lots of people, but like lots of faculty collaborate with folks either in the product groups at Google or the actual product groups at Microsoft. So like that's an easy way to do it. I would also say to a certain degree, if you're in university, your job is not to solve the problems of companies. You should be thinking much more out there, right? Like, yeah, it's great to be relevant, but sometimes I just think like, when the researchers were doing research on like Paxos and view stamp replication, and IBM was going around saying we're only going to have 5 computers in the world. Like there's got to be something like going on in your head where you're like, okay, but I'm going to work on distributed systems. And like that, that panned out, but like, I'm sure a bunch of other stuff didn't, right? But that's okay because it doesn't matter because that's sort of the far out there research that that we're all being paid to do. So, I mean, people at MSR do crazy things, work on crazy things too. So I would not like, I think my particular set of interests lend themselves to working on problems that are relevant to Microsoft, but there are definitely people at MSR that are working on like talking plants and
Yeah, definitely it's collaboration, but collaboration would still be, more on the let's say, time frame alignment with the company. So sometimes it's also good that you obviously talk to to researchers or even product teams in companies, and you ask them, okay, so we're not necessarily interested in solving your immediate problems or something like that, but where do you see this headed? And you don't have the, let's say, resources to invest in that line of research. And many times you can get that sort of problems. So, 5 to 10 years ahead of research that you could do in academia, again, in some sort of collaboration with industry, but not as close as, that you would get full-time dedicated researcher in the company. And then, yes, as Irene said, our job in academia is not always to solve the current problems of industry. It's actually to look beyond and to even use the freedom that we have. For example, there are many things that you just can't do in industry because you're limited to, I don't know, backward compatibility, or the client's this, and the stack needs to look like that. I mean, I don't care. I can question whether this is the appropriate process abstraction in the OS for databases or future data systems, and I can do any sorts of assumptions. Nothing is necessarily tying me down, except for maybe a review or two that is questioning my assumptions. But basically, that's what academia or academics should be doing, right? So you want to go for some crazy research, provided that obviously funding agency gives you money for that and so on. But don't tie yourself to what can be immediately, patched to Linux or whatever Oracle database and things like that, because yes, that will have an immediate impact maybe, but that's not our job, right? So.
I agree with Irene and Yana. I don't have anything else to add on top of that.
So,
Okay, thank you. So I have a question from Jin Liu. How do you think about work-life balance?
okay, I'm going to take the cheap answer. I don't, but that's a lie. I think it's like, it's just can't be constant, right? Like sometimes work and life are balanced. A lot of the time they're not. I mean, maybe over a long enough averaging window, things look pretty good, but there are spikes. Of course, we're generally deadline driven. So I don't see how one maintains work-life balance, 2 days before the SOSP deadline or whatever, right? So, I mean, unless you planned way ahead and you were done 2 weeks ago or something, which would be fantastic, but that's never happened to me. So I don't know. I think maybe having a little bit of this give and take, which I think means consciously making an effort to take when you can. So look out ahead a little bit. This is going to be a crunch time. This is going to be a crunch time. This is going to be a crunch time. I better, take a little bit of a break, a little bit of a rest, try and aim my attentions elsewhere. I think that's maybe the way to sort of just proactively smooth things out in a wide sense, because I just don't see a way, at least for me personally, maybe other people do, of making the, weeks leading up to an important deadline not all about the deadline. Like, sure, you lose a little sleep, you crank on stuff a little bit, okay, but maybe the narrow sense is okay.
Yeah, so I used to be like what Riyadh is saying, like until 5 months ago, until my baby was born. Since baby, it's been like I can work only while the nanny is here. So that's like 8:30 to like 5:30 on weekdays. If there's a deadline on a Saturday, okay. If my husband just does pitch in, and like whenever he can handle the baby, I get some work done. But otherwise, like, yeah, the baby gets priority. So I'd like to hear what Yana has to say about this, because she has been grappling with this for longer. So yeah, but actually I'm actually also enjoying this kind of a lifestyle, like kind of this forced break from work, like, spending time with the baby. It's actually helping me get more efficient during those work hours. So that's good.
Yeah, I have to agree. Family definitely changed things tremendously to my time schedule. What I learned is that you get a lot more efficient with time management. So you are really getting 100% out of the working hours you get while child is in childcare. Weekends, nap time, partner taking care of it. But if you have two academics or two partners that are equally, because my husband has a PhD, so we both have very demanding careers, so we need to make room for each other. For example, evening, now it's 8 p.m, so my husband is with a kid, but you make that sort of balance. But another thing is that what I learned in this couple of years after PhD is that as a professor, it's not really as a PhD student that you have these, two major deadlines per year or something like that, right? So I have projects from, database world where we have VLDB rolling deadline and Sigma, but then there is also systems community. And then it's not just these deadlines, right? There is the reviewing deadlines, there is the grant writing deadlines. So I feel like I'm constantly in some sort of a deadline mode. And I can't do the same thing I was doing as a PhD where, I really fully dedicate these 2 weeks and I, forget about my social life, because it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And you need to find some sustainable way of handling all that, which again puts me in this time management thing. And of course, with kids, young kids, you'll realize, Radhika, once the little one starts going to daycare, then they get sick all the time. And I can't plan for that, right? So I always need to add 30% to any sort of deadline, because I can't assume that, she's getting fine and then I get sick and so on, right? So all of this time management planning and so on seems a lot more important now than it was. And if I don't pay attention to getting enough sleep and eating well and so on, then it's of course easier for me to get the stupid virus that she brought from daycare. So as I said, it's a marathon. There will be a lot more deadlines afterwards, and you will need to you may not have kids, but there will be something else, right, that needs to keep you in a healthy mode for functioning in the long run. And sometimes it will be that you need to make, certain spikes and sacrifices, but in most of the time, these are very few occasions, a couple of days before the conference, I help a lot my students, but it's not like previously, the last 2 weeks are completely blocked, forget about me, that I was telling my family or friends, right? So this is a major shift that you experience. And I think I learned to be a lot more efficient and plan better. Yeah. So for example, in the first couple of years, I was on so many PC committees, and now I'm learning to say no, right? Because it's just, priorities.
Yeah, I wanted to say that I think actually my biggest lever for work-life balance is saying no. Because once I commit to something, it's a certain number of hours that are going to be tacked on to my week, or, whenever the deadline is, right? And there are only so many times I can say yes before my week fills up and I'm starting to overflow into the weekend or into the evenings. And so, I definitely didn't realize that when I started, because everything is exciting and new, and, I wanted to do it all at once. And so, now I'm much, much more selective about what I say yes to, only things that I really care about and that I know, I'll have time for without it running into my weekends and bleeding out into my evenings. And it's not a perfect system, right? You still kind of have to tweak the knob, and I kind of oscillate back and forth, but that's I think that's the biggest. I think part of it too is I've learned that I don't have any forcing function. I don't have kids, right? I don't have any forcing function to make me turn off my brain and stop working. And so that's something that I've had to kind of train myself, especially with the pandemic and we're all at home. My office is just like 2 steps from my bedroom. like, you know, if I have some idea, I could just pop in here and like hack on it for a little bit and see if it works. Yeah, bad idea. And so, yeah, that's totally, I think learning to set boundaries, and, you know, maybe they're, you know, boundaries because your kid is sick or your nanny is not here and you just can't do that work anymore. But outside of that, I think it's good to learn to set hard boundaries around how much you're willing to, how much it's healthy for you to work, let's say. I think I'm willing to work much more than it's healthy for me to work because I like my job. So that's always the problem for everyone here, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Is that
And like the last 5 months, okay, so I have a teaching relief, but I haven't felt like that much of a time crunch because I have said no to a lot of PCs. I have teaching reliefs, I have like lots of commitments, but it's not that, you know, I'm kind of missing like working for like 12 hours a day. Like it's like I'm being able to get that work done in that smaller amount of time. It's just a matter of planning well and like being more efficient with your time, and like, you should be able to get some time out. Although I might have something different to say next semester when I will actually be teaching. So yeah.
Okay, great, thank you. So we have a question from Natasha. What surprised you most about becoming faculty or researcher since graduating?
Sorry, I didn't catch the last part of the question. Since what?
Sorry, okay. What surprised you most about becoming faculty or researcher since graduating? Sorry.
yeah, it's just a hard question. So many. Okay, I guess I'll start with reviewing a lot of papers. It has made me a much better researcher and writer because it's really easy to spot things that are confusing in other people's papers. You see patterns of mistakes that people make. And I didn't, you know, I thought I was pretty good at writing papers in grad school. You know, we all get a lot of practice, right? But like there's like another level when you read 100 papers a year and realize yeah, that thing I was doing is really a bad idea, because if someone is reading 20 papers for this conference, they're not gonna, you know, be able to suss out whatever subtle point you were trying to make. So yeah, I think maybe that was something that was surprising for me.
So for me, like more than surprising, like maybe I can just answer a slightly different question on like what I felt was different and what I sort of still learning how to cope with. So as a grad student, I used to just, you know, focus on like one project at a time. I used to like know that project in and out. But as a faculty, like I'm now sort of, I have multiple students who are all working on their own projects, and like it's like kind of like I have like more breadth but less depth into each of the project, and that's something that I'm really trying to like sort of cope with, like sort of like solutions on problems don't come to me as easily as they would when I was just, you know, the lead person giving my 100% of my time on like one single project and I knew it inside out. Like now it takes me like some time to like, you know, have to actually like, you know, take a step back, like actually like, you know, have like long meetings with my students to really like understand the system in enough depth, and then, you know, try to come up with like the solution. It's not coming to me as naturally as what it used to when I was a grad student. So that's one thing I'm still like trying to like sort of grapple with. So it's mostly like, you know, moving from like, you know, one project to another during the day, like, you know, you have like 1 or 2 hours meeting on one project and then you move to another, and like you have to do that context switching, you have to get into that zone, and like that's just like harder than what I had imagined. So yeah.
Okay. So a question from Amy. What advice do you have for students about to enter the job market for both industry or academia?
Join the Slack that they have for students that are interviewing. I think that's probably the best advice that I could possibly give. I am not on the Slack. I didn't have the Slack when I was interviewing, but I've heard good things about it. And I think it's great that the students are able to talk to each other about the process. Yeah.
I wasn't on the Slack, but I was on the market with Fraser, who's also on this call. And we basically just talked about it nonstop for 6 months because that's the only thing you're thinking about. And so you need to talk about it with somebody, right? Or at least I do. I can't think about something without talking about it. So yeah, having somebody to talk to about it is just, I mean, it'll make the difference between sanity and other. Maybe beyond that one, which I think that's probably the best single piece of advice. The one that for me, like conceptually was super important was thinking about the statement of purpose, or the research statement rather, thinking about the research statement as sort of an outline for what your job talk will be. Like that's its function. Like the research statement, in reality, there's not so much emphasis on that in the application. This is aiming really at academic. I can't say for industry positions. The decision to interview you or not is not going to come down to like, I didn't like the wording in this research statement, but the structure of the research statement will turn into a job talk more or less easily, depending on how much time you spend on it. And the job talk really is the single most important thing that you do during the job season. So take it as a way of like honing the argument, like putting something together that is like a full picture. Get tons of feedback on it. You will be able to get more detailed feedback on a piece of writing than you will on a talk, basically no matter what, because people can sit down and put notes into a PDF. So like hone it, and then lean on it heavily when you actually write the job talk. That advice basically came directly from David Mazieres, by the way. So like I'm not claiming that this is my wisdom, it's his, or maybe somebody else's before him, but and you know, he speaks for himself.
I mean, it depends on how long in this studies you are, right? So if you are already on the job market, then yes. If you are slightly before that, right, then as we said, it's great that you do an internship, ideally somewhere close to the last summer before graduating, because it helps you make a decision whether to go to industry or research. Another thing I did, because I was based in Europe also then, is that whenever I went to the US, even before I was on the job market, I wanted to give talks, right? So I'm going there for a conference. Why don't I visit also some of the universities that are nearby or some of the companies that are nearby? And I just go and meet people, give a talk about what they do, talk about what I do, right? And this is... obviously, one, it helps you again to make helps you make a decision. It also, it's a practice, right? Giving talks is always good. And talking to people is always good. Now, obviously, industry interviews are different because, as Irene said, if I interview now for the systems group at MSR, I mainly will talk to all the systems people there, while in the academic market, you talk to, people in the department talk on a variety of topics, which obviously you can do you could practice at your local university. So for example, I gave my talk in front of theory people and graphics people and security people and architecture people, and they gave me super valuable feedback. Actually, the best feedback I got from the theory person, because he's probably the furthest away from the systems work I do. And they told me, here I didn't really quite get what you wanted to say, and why is this important? And can you clarify these things, right? And this is also because the academic talk, the interview talk, is also helping people assess on how well can you teach, let's say, an audience about your expert area, so that they get the key idea without being in your area of research. So these sorts of, as I said, it all boils down to giving talks and talking to people, regardless of them being in industry, academia in your area or outside of your area. And together with an internship and, you know, all this networking, I think this is the best you can do in the last year of preparation, right? So that would be my advice.
Yeah, so I completely agree. So I didn't give a lot of talks outside of my grad school, but in Berkeley, like I gave my talk. I practiced my talk in front of like different people from different areas, like sort of just friends in other areas and so on. So I think practicing your talk really helps. Another little advice that I got, which really helped me during the interview process was so something the advisor told me was to just be myself. So some people during the interview, they tried to pretend to be like, you know, someone who they are not, like maybe pretending to be smarter than who you are or things like that, or just, you know, like trying to like make up answers that would make you sound smarter than, you know, what you actually are. But like and people can see through that basically, and it will make you feel like very uncomfortable. So just be comfortable about who you are, and like, if you don't know something, you can just say that you don't know, and it's okay. Like don't try to pretend to be someone else who you're not, because eventually the place is going to hire you for who you are, and you want them to hire you for who you are. So just like don't pretend, and like just be yourself and enjoy the process. I actually found the interview process to be pretty enjoyable. Like you get to meet like a whole bunch of people, and like it's actually like once in a lifetime opportunity, like, you know, going to like so many different universities, meeting people from like other areas, and like, you know, talking to them, you know, learning about their work. It's a fun process. So like try to find the enjoyment in that. Don't stress out too much about it, and like sort of, yeah, have fun in the process as well and be yourself.
Okay, thank you to all of you.
May I add one small
yeah.
mechanical suggestion?
Okay, of course, yes.
This is tiny, but if I hope that nobody has to, but if you have to like do interviews and job talks and all of this on Zoom, make sure that your audio is good. The video is somewhat important, but people are really looking at your slides. If they can't understand what you're saying, if there's an annoying sound, if there's a buzzing, that's just, I mean, subconsciously fatal. So test it out carefully. The audio should be crisp and clear. It should really sound like it should. The audio is super, super, super important. This was advice I got consistently from many people. Maybe by now we've spent enough time on Zoom that we know this, but like, yeah, the video, they're looking at your slides. Audio, they're listening to you.
Thank you, Ayad. Thank you to all of you. We are at the end of this session. It was really interesting. I thought that an hour will be too much, but I think we could stay and talking for maybe an hour again. So thank you to all of you. It was really interesting. I think we have a lot of advices from all of you, and that will help us. So Annie, you have the floor.
Yeah, so thank you, Yana, Riyad, Radhika, and Irene. I really enjoyed this session. I'm glad we ended on a high note. And thank you to everybody who attended. I know it's hard to attend Zoom meetings like nonstop nowadays, but I'm really glad you came to our workshop, and I hope you had a good time and got what you wanted out of it. And as a reminder, SOSP is next like 2 or 3 days, I think. So be active on Slack, you know, reach out to people who you met, for example, at this workshop. The point is like to get you to network with people and meet other people and collaborate, because I think one of the themes of these AMAs is like collaboration is really what makes you do good research and, you know, stay in touch with the community. So yeah, thank you everybody for coming. Natasha, do you want to add anything?
If you're trying to speak to someone at the conference and you're not quite sure how to approach them, reach out to one of us. We'll make the introductions. Just use this workshop, use us to get what you want and what you need from the conference.
Okay, all right, thank you everybody. Thanks for